thank you all for taking the time to be present. Pursuant to the provisions of the Metropolitan Code of Laws, please take notice that decisions of the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County Community Oversight Board may be appealed to the Chancery Court of Davidson County for review under a common law judicial writ. Any appeal must be filed within 60 days after entry of a final decision by the board. Any person or other entity considering an appeal should consult with an attorney to ensure that time and procedural requirements are met. I'll turn now to the board secretary and ask Mr. Goddard to acknowledge if we've established a quorum.
We do have a quorum, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Goddard. And now we move to the approval of the minutes from the previous meeting. They were sent out to you in the packet. Please take a moment and then let us know of any required modifications. Hearing none, call for the question. Is there any further unreadiness? Hearing none, all in favor of adopting the minutes as presented, let it be known by the sign aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Now is the time for public comment. Do we have members of the public who wish to be recognized and heard at this time? Any members of the public not on the agenda who wish to be recognized at this time? We moved into the chair's remark. For the record, I will waive the reading and reserve the right. A couple of months ago, we were asked as a board to consider hearing a special presentation that was brought to our attention as something that would be very helpful to this board by our own board member, Mr. Nguyen. I'm pleased to say that we have that presentation prepared today, and I'd like to invite Ms. Greta McLean, who is the Executive Director of Silent No Longer, to come forward with the presentation.
Actually picked the right button. Good evening, and I want to thank all of y'all for inviting me to speak today. And I also want to make it clear up front that I am not anti-law enforcement. As somebody who wore the uniform for many years, I respect officers who conduct themselves professionally and with integrity, and those who do not conduct themselves in that way, my personal opinion is they don't need to be on the job. As you may know, Jason Ronbold was allowed to resign from the department instead of being fired. And a local news organization also found that OPA is not filing reports with the Tennessee Post Commission. Now, you may want to wonder why I'm involved in this. Well, I'm the director of an organization, Silent No Longer Tennessee, that provides programs and services to survivors of sexual assault. And advocacy is one of those services that we provide. And when I was establishing the organization, I did not realize how needed that service would be until April of 2020. That's when the first two victims from MMPD contacted me alleging that they were sexually harassed and assaulted by Jason Ronbold. Following a TBI investigation, the district attorney's office publicly stated that there was enough evidence to prosecute Jason Ronbold. But unfortunately, the statute of limitations had run out after the department chose not to appropriately act on the complaint. As of January 2022, we have 67 current and former police officers who have contacted us about sexual assault, sexual harassment, gender and racial discrimination, as well as retaliation. Since then, since January, 4 more employees have come forward, as well as 3 previous employees who are now reporting additional issues. Many of them continue to struggle with anxiety, depression, severe PTSD as a direct result of their experiences being employed by the Metro Nashville Police Department. Shortly after these accusations and issues first became public, I began receiving texts that included sexually explicit photos, threats like, "You better watch your back," "I know where you live," and "Do you have a death wish?" I also received letters with no return address. The most recent ones were in August, with one containing a photo of a dead rat, and the other one a drawing of a woman with her throat cut. This is a problem, obviously, that has not been addressed by the Metro Police Department, and to be honest, I don't believe it will unless this board, council members, city leaders, and the public put enough pressure on Chief Drake and Mayor Cooper so that they feel that there is no alternative but to put policies in place to protect their own employees. Lastly, I also believe that it's important for the Nashville community at large to understand that this is an issue that does not just affect employees of the police department. This behavior has already resulted in lawsuits and damages being awarded to victims. That's our money. That is taxpayer money that's being used to defend the indefensible instead of spending the time and the money to address the problems. I think most people would agree that that money would be much better spent fixing or adding new sidewalks so our children can walk to their friend's house or walk to school safely, or so that we can hire the 36 EMTs needed according to a November 7th news account. Those 36 EMTs can mean the difference between life and death for any of us. But instead, Chief Drake and Mayor Cooper has refused to act, and that, again, impacts all of us here in Nashville. I, for one, do not want any of us to potentially lose a loved one because there aren't enough EMTs around. And I don't believe that our tax dollars should be spent to defend officers who have sexually assaulted, harassed, or otherwise violated the civil rights of their fellow officers. It's time for us to stop talking about this problem and time that we start addressing the problem and find a way to fix it before there's more victims within the department or more innocent victims within our Nashville community. Now, you have a packet that I gave out with recommendations that I gave to the department. The last two, however, were not presented because despite Chief Drake emailing me saying, yes, I would love to meet with you to discuss these, he has since refused for the past 2 years now to answer or respond to any of my meeting requests. If any of y'all have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Questions for the presenter? Questions from the board? I have one.
Yes, sir.
Can you tell me a little bit more about the services that Silent No More provides?
The advocacy services is the one that we tend to provide the most. Other services we have are referral services, whether it's for legal assistance, mental health assistance, addiction services. We also provide referrals for rental assistance, utility assistance, and food assistance. We provide those primarily because a lot of people who have been sexually assaulted because of PTSD, anxiety, severe depression, they often aren't able, mentally at least, to go to work, and obviously they're going to fall behind on rent and other bills, so we want to provide them with those services as best as we can.
And also training services, is that correct?
Yes, we also provide training services.
You provide sexual harassment training services?
Yes, sir.
Board Member Nguyen?
Yeah, full disclosure, Chair, Greta and I work together as patrol officers at the Metro Police Department, and her father was a major on the department, Frank Galball, and he was my commander on the SWAT team, which I served on for 15 years here with Metro. So I've known Greta a long time, and I've known her in her advocacy after she left the police department. I was very happy to see her get into this work because we need more people advocating for people who can't speak up for themselves. So I wanted to ask Greta, and I've got a few other things I want to mention too about what it looks like for a police department to raise its standard a bit higher. But I wanted to ask Greta, I know there's a campaign in Nashville and in a lot of other places, this 30 by 30 campaign to increase the numbers of female officers on the police department up to 30%. The Canadians are at 25 to 30, the Australians are at 30, and the U.S. is still at around 10% with women in policing. And women bring things to policing that men don't. There are fewer lawsuits filed against female officers. There are fewer complaints filed against female officers. Women officers have a sense of diffusing crisis a bit better often than men do. And this has been documented through studies, so it's there. So we need more women in policing. But if we've got a workplace where sexual assault or sexual misconduct is there, I would think that would be a deterrent. So if we truly want to have a more diverse police department, would you agree that raising the standard around sexual misconduct would be more appealing to potential female recruits to the Metro Police Department?
Definitely. I would definitely agree with that. And if I may, the reason that I left the department is not because I was sexually harassed or assaulted, but when I was staffing a case when I was in sexual assault unit, the lieutenant at the time told me, well, she said no, but she went into his bedroom and let him take off her blouse. So she said no, but she was saying yes, close the case. And as somebody who had looked up to law enforcement since I was knee-high to a grasshopper, and wanted to be just like my dad, it really threw me for a loop and really disheartened me. And it took me almost a year of battling with myself. Is this something I still want to do? And even after reporting it to a sergeant who I was told talked to the captain, nothing was done. And I decided, you know what, this isn't the atmosphere I want to be in, and that's why I left the department and started working at nonprofits.
So at that time, how long ago was that, Owen?
1999.
Okay. So to put it in time and context, which I think is important.
Yes, sir.
We had a sex crimes unit at the police department in 1984 and 85, as I remember, one of the first in the country.
Yes, sir.
So the understanding about consent in criminal investigations was not a mystery when you were a sex crimes investigator. Is that correct?
No, sir, it was not.
So, and we've gotten a lot better around it since then. The other thing I wanted to mention, Chair, is that one of my employers, again, full disclosure, is the IACP. And the Policy Center at IACP has been working over the last, I'd say, 3 years to produce a protocol, a policy, model policy on two issues. Sexual harassment's one, and one is sexual misconduct by law enforcement, because it's one of the biggest coming issues around police ethics that we've had to face ever. How do we deal with officers who are, participating in any kind of sexual misconduct with a citizen or anyone inside the police departments? It's a big issue. So the Policy Center decided to put together a standalone, not part of some SOPs, not part of another protocol, policy that addresses sexual misconduct by law enforcement. And The one that we have used was just written 3 years earlier. So this is a brand new topic for law enforcement, but it's not a new issue. I can tell you from my experience when I worked at Metro, I investigated sexual misconduct by police against citizens, against their only family members. So this is not new. But what's new is our acknowledgement of it because of overall how police are dealing with crimes against women for the most part. And if we're truly, and I think Metro is a great department in a lot of ways, they've got room for improvement, obviously, like most do too. But I think if we have a city that has an agency that acknowledges that crimes against women is a high priority, and it is, we've got the largest family safety center in the country in Nashville, then we ought to have a serious, courageous conversation about sexual misconduct by our officers and all the things that go with it. Because when you talk to anyone that works in this field, they'll tell you that more likely if you've got an officer that's engaged in sexual misconduct, they're engaged in other things as well. Now, I'm a 90-10er. I think 90% of the crimes commit by 10% of the population. So it's not every uniform in the country, but it's those uniforms that can destroy the morale and credibility and ethics of a police department if they're left unchecked. So I hope you've had a chance to read over the protocols that I sent and that eventually that we make a recommendation to the chief and the city to up the standard and adopt the policies that Greta and her nonprofit are recommending for the future. Thank you.
Comments from members of the board? Director Pitcher.
Okay. I don't think my mic is working. All right. Thank you, Ms. McLean, for being here. My question is related to post standards. So how do they fit into this structure? We're having this conversation, and aren't they the agency that determines or makes determinations that's related to officers moving from agency to agency, even with a background or discipline record that may include sexual misconduct claims?
If those issues are sent to the post commission, yes, ma'am. But if an agency is not sending them, if they aren't filing reports, then the post commission has no way of knowing.
So does post not require those records? Like if an officer, because I mean, it's dealing with certification of an officer, right? And commissioning of an officer. So does post not, and you may not know these questions, I'm just trying to think as I'm thinking about what you said and what you presented to us, like how do we address this issue in a larger scale? We know if the police department where a person who may have these predator tendencies is employed but decides to move to another county or out of the state, I know there's a big talk through the unions about this, but how do we protect not only women but men who have been victimized by people wearing a badge who are sexual predators? And it seems like it would start, the root of it is with the commission, with post.
I would agree that yes, post is the one that it should be rooted in. But if there is not legislation, and to be honest, I'm not positive, I don't think that there is legislation saying that something is going to be done to the department or the individual if they fail to file those reports. So, and again, I could be mistaken, I'm not positive. But if they aren't held accountable, then there's only so much the post can do. My recommendation would be to make it a requirement across the state that would obviously have to go through our General Assembly, that if there are any allegations like this or any type of violence or drugs or whatever being involved, that it is automatically sent to the commission and that there are consequences for organizations or agencies that do not file those.
Thank you.
Other comments? Board Member Haddock.
Greta, In your opinion, if we don't, or if nothing is done, or we don't act upon this serious manner of sexual misconduct from officers, where do you think we're headed, specifically MNPD and the Nashville community, if nothing is done?
From what I'm hearing from clients that have come to us, to be honest, it's very possible there could be, I think there's already one that's been made, but an additional recommendation made to the Department of Justice to intervene. And if nothing is done from there, Mr. Wynn could probably talk about this better, but my understanding that if recommendations are made by the Department of Justice and they are not implemented, then the government actually comes in and starts running it. So it becomes out of the control of the city. That does not look good for the city of Nashville. And I think the fact that we are already fairly severely understaffed as far as police officers go, we don't need to continue to lose officers because of this type of behavior, whether it's sexual assault and harassment, or if it's, racial discrimination or gender discrimination. That puts the entire community at risk. And if it's taking an officer 6 or 7 more minutes to get to a call of violence, that literally can be the difference between life and death. And that's something that I think the people of Nashville deserve to know. Same as I was talking about earlier, the lawsuits. That's money that could be much better spent than having to pay out because officers either aren't being trained well enough, they aren't, and I went through the academy in 91. I don't know anything about the training, so I'm not going to guess great or bad or in the middle. But for whatever reason, these things continue to happen. That hurts us economically, not only from the perspective of having to pay out money, but also businesses lose an average of $70,000 per sexual assault victim. Sexual assault victims, I just lost my train of thought for a second. A loss of productivity ends up being a loss in profits. A loss in profits ends up being a loss in tax revenue. So that in and of itself also hurts the city of Nashville. If we're not getting the tax revenue, that may mean that we can't upgrade sidewalks or repair potholes and do things that need to be done. And that's why I keep saying I think it's important for the citizens to understand that this doesn't just affect the officers that are in the department. It affects every single one of us. And if nothing's done, it hurts that. It hurts our reputation. We have an opportunity to kind of be a beacon showing our department is willing to be completely transparent, hold themselves accountable, and be something that other departments around the country can look towards and say, look what they're doing. They are making sure that they hold people accountable, and they're allowing, they don't just have this one little office of people investigating their own. They're bringing other people in to make sure that it is very transparent and things are done right. Me personally, I would think that that's something that our city would really be interested in, is being able to tout the fact that, hey, we've gone, so far as, this is what we want to do to let the people of Nashville feel safe, people in the department feel safe, and that other departments can look at and say, they got their stuff together and we want to be just like them. That's something we could really hang our hat on if the mayor and the chief are willing to do it.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure, please.
Do you know how many litigation cases or cases that the city has settled?
Off the top of my head, I personally know of 4, and 2 more have recently been filed. So how many are outstanding? I don't have the exact number. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, and kind of to that point, of course, our jurisdictional responsibility here is to investigate complaints brought by the citizens of Nashville and Davidson County, in addition to promulgate policy that addresses issues that are by evidentiary standards going on or not going on in the MMPD. Certainly, a lot of the data that you've shared with us this evening applies in a very general sense, I think, throughout the United States, as Board Member Wynn says. And certainly, I think that not only public organizations like MMPD, but also private organizations contribute greatly to this somewhat cultural travesty that goes on in these organizations. I'm looking for a methodology to incorporate a discussion amongst this board, not necessarily reaching any conclusions, but a discussion amongst this board about what is our role and how do we reach any kind of policy kind of place as far as our specific charge in this specific jurisdiction is concerned. And certainly, in answering Director Fitcher's question, you began to give us a little bit about the data that you probably know a heck of a lot more about than at least I know I do here sitting here. On the other side, from an investigative standpoint, I found it interesting during my conversations with representatives of OPA that more than 60% of the investigations are initiated police officer on police officer. And I would imagine that some of that, what we're talking about, is included in that. And I've often asked the question, both to MMPD personnel and others, is like, how do we become aware of what those things are? Where's our intersection, so that we can, again, from an evidentiary standpoint, really make more, informed decisions about how we exercise our authority in that regard. So I definitely want to give other board members an opportunity here, but I just wanted to throw that out and make sure that we're operating from as much of a position of information within our jurisdiction, within our authority, as we go forward with a discussion, a possible discussion about how we get to that policy end, through what data, through what kind of research, and then, I'll say it again, how we peek inside some of those OPA, investigations that are going on officer. I really find that quite a gap, if you will, and I may be out of turn. I see the past chairs in the room, and of course we got a knowledgeable staff. But I would think that if an MMPD officer was also a resident of Nashville or Davidson County, that they may have the right to come to this board with a complaint like any other citizen, as opposed to going internal. We'd love to. Well, we would that's definitely within our authority and our jurisdiction. And I've mentioned that as well with certain MMPD personnel. And I'd really like to get an answer to that. I'm sorry, I'm going to defer now, and I see Board Member Whittle.
Thank you. First of all, I think that is a great suggestion. I just wanted to get clarification. You said, Ms. McClain, that Chief Drake agreed to meet with you, and that was about 2 years ago. And since then, has he been unresponsive, or have you just been have you heard from anyone, or and have you been provided any reasons as to why it's been 2 years and you haven't been able to get a meeting with him?
The first reason, I was told that the first reason why he declined to have a meeting with me was because he wanted me to talk with Chief Loki first. So I did, presented her with this information, most of it, not the last two items, but presented it with her. She said that she would present it to Chief Drake and the other chiefs, get their feedback and meet with me. She met with me a second time. We discussed it further. According to her, that they still had not gotten back with her, but as soon as they did, then she would make sure that I would get that scheduled meeting. It probably 5 or 6 months after that, or actually probably more than that, maybe almost a year, she ended up resigning or retiring. So during that time, I was emailing her and Chief Drake saying, Chief, I know you're busy. There's a lot going on. We had COVID. If we want to do a Zoom meeting, we don't even have to do it, in person. Can we discuss this? I would not get an answer from him. I would get something from Chief Loki saying, I will check with him and try to get a date. But he never, other than that initial response, he has never responded to any emails or any phone calls that I have given since then. And that was around December of 2020.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any other comments? Director Fisher.
Thank you for sharing. I think this is such a really a timely conversation. Mr. Nguyen presented to us some documentation about sexual assault misconduct investigations. And my concern here is we have two of the top agencies who are producing policy, the top law enforcement agency in the country, which is the Department of Justice, and then you have the IACP creating policies, and our chief of police or our department or administration just refuses to flat out take those and put those and implement those policies. It concerns me because, if they won't take those, and we're here to make recommendations, I'm just concerned that, what is it that we are doing that can top what the Department of Justice is doing, and we have a department that's resistant to change. I wanted to thank you, too. I know it takes a lot of work. You've been fighting this fight for several years now. I remember when those first allegations of misconduct came out. I wanted to bring up how long some of these women had experienced some of this violent behavior from members of the police department, and how we had tried to address one, at least, a top executive in the police department. And because of the civil service rules, even the recommendations that we made were not enough to either stop retirement. They waited so long. Even the district attorney general said that there was enough allegations there that if the statute of limitations hadn't run out, that the person would have been charged criminally. And so I think that this is something that we need to be urgent about in our response to these types of allegations, but also these recommendations. So thank you for your presence and sharing this information with us.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Anything further before we continue the board discussion? Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Thank you for your time. Hope you all have a good evening.
Okay. Is there some direction here? I don't want to leave out anyone's desire to move the discussion forward, or any suggestions about how we move this conversation forward? Do we approach it from a policy standpoint that needs to be implemented, that has come down from other agencies, and make a recommendation to the chief like we would on just about any other? Director Crowder? I'm sorry, Board Member Brown?
Been elevated to director. Thank you.
Have you seen the way that person works? It may not be an elevation. Go ahead.
I would think the proper procedure, with an encouragement to do it promptly, would be to ask the executive director and staff to make a recommendation on preparation of a policy proposal. I don't know how much work that is, how long it would take. Give us some sense of that as you come back, how that fits in with your current workload. But this strikes me as a policy recommendation. We have a procedure for that. We have staff with experience doing that, and a lot of things to look at, to be considered, putting one together. But I think that's the route rather than a committee or something like that.
I appreciate that. Is there any objection? I'm sorry.
I wanted to add to that, Chair, the creators of the Justice Department policy, the two law enforcement officers and a prosecutor, I should be more than happy to consult with the staff on a strategy. They've worked on it for many years for the Justice Department. So I'm sure they've been asked this question before by other agencies about how it works, how much of the policy is usable, and how do we apply it, how do we train it, how do we adopt it. So I'm sure they'd be more than happy to correspond with you. Just let me know, and I'll reach out to them for your purpose. I think that's probably a good idea to have us all study it, look at it for a future recommendation.
Yeah, I don't think that requires a vote. Just if there's no objection to that instruction, then we'll look forward to some feedback on that in the coming meetings. Thank you very much. Appreciate that, and look forward to pushing that forward. All right, that takes us to the next item on our agenda, Attorney Daniel Yoon on the nomination committee update.
Hello. I think this is working. I have a light. I don't have an update on the nominations committee. I have a request or a reminder, a gentle nudge from the legal advisor as to the appropriateness of meeting. The nomination committee right now is Ms. Hildreth, Mr. Holloway, and Mr. Witzel. So 2 out of the 3 nominations committee members will be rolling off. They may or may not choose to reapply and get nominated again. There is also 2 out of the 4 officers who terms will be expiring as far as when they were elected to office in February. So just a good reminder that the nominations committee is one of our standing committees comprised of 3 members appointed by the chair. It may be appropriate to appoint new members early, and then when they do meet before February, before January, when these new board members come in or when those officers' terms expire, they can choose the appropriateness of scheduling that, the method of which they're going to present the nominees, judge their qualifications, and also see if they're willing to serve in advance of these board meetings. It really helps move things along. I think there was one time when we had new members come in, we had old officers, and we didn't have sort of that procedures in place, and it wasn't as clean and as friendly and helpful as it could have been. So that's the purpose of this line item. I'm a little intimidated that I'm a complete line item on this agenda, but the other thing I can add to it, it's not on the agenda, is the budget, quarterly budget discussions. I think in the past 5 months, I don't think we've had any, so we can maybe throw one in there before the next quarter and make sure that we're looking at that as an executive committee body. And apart from that, I'll take any questions about the bylaws or rules on either the nominations committee or the budget.
Any questions, any comments? I feel the same urgency about these upcoming rolling off, members who are rolling off. I don't know at what point we would get an indication as to whether or not they will reapply. I guess that would be within the nomination process. But the idea of those who are affected being a part of the nomination committee doesn't really, intimidate me a whole lot, because those individuals, they'll make their choices, and I know they'll make, choices that will have a great deal of integrity. So unless there's something that is in the bylaws, or maybe something that might be a matter of statute, am I okay leaving the committee as it is?
Absolutely, and I can reach out to the chair of that committee, Ms. Hildreth, and inquire as to her continued vigor and interest in serving as the chair, or Mr. Holloway or Mr. Witzel. And then if any of them choose that they just don't have the time, because they did do a robust job in the past few months to schedule several meetings and reach out to board members to get a vacancy filled. So it may just be a little bit too much over the holidays, and if they can't, we can reach out to the chair and you can appoint somebody else. But in the meantime, those 3 are still the nominations committee, and then we will reach out to them to make sure that they're able to meet between now and the next December meeting or January meeting.
Excellent. And I'm sorry, Director Pitcher.
Oh, okay. Well, one of the things that I wanted to know is how are we going to advertise that? Do we just send it, at what point do we send it to the vice mayor to say that we have these 3 people either potentially rolling off, or maybe staying? Is that going to be like mid-January so that we can have them for the February meeting? How does that work?
Sure, and I want to distinguish, there's the 3 board vacancies that are coming up in February, but there's also the 4 general officers. That's what I was more looking towards. The board members, they'll be appointed after nominations and elections by council, and we can reach out to them now. We've reached out to them traditionally in the past, well in advance of when they start advertising. They like to do it 30 to 45 days in advance. There's no reason they can't do it much sooner than that to give more of a chance for other people in the community to find out. And also, we've done our own advertising as well. But, we can reach out to the board member, the Metro Council clerk, to start that advertising process and pick a date so that we'll know for our logistic purposes. But also, we should be doing our own parallel work to get a slate of officer nominees.
And the elections for officers on this board is like scheduled for what, February or March, or when is it?
It's interesting. I don't know how much y'all want to wade into it, but we actually have 5 officers, right? We have Mr. Holloway, who's serving after appointment in August by the former chair. His term is for a year, so he is still not quite an officer, but on the executive committee. The other 4, yourself, Mr. Milner, you were elected by the general board, so your term would also last for a year. Otherwise, if you had been appointed by the then acting chair, Ms. Hildreth, you would have just served until the expiration of the former chair. So it's interesting. We only have 2 that are finishing in February of this next year, both of whom their term as a board member will expire before then, in January. And then the remaining 3 officers, your terms won't expire until Mr. Goddard and Mr. Holloway May 25th of next year, and Mr. Milner August of next year. Obviously, we could do a whole new slate in February, but we don't need to. We only needed to pick 2. There's also some benefits, actually, to having a staggered board, because then we don't have a situation where, oh, whoops, we forgot to do nominations committee, and now we don't have any officers. We will always have, in this staggered way, again, it wasn't contemplated or thought out as intentionally as that, but we can take credit for it anyway. To have a staggered election actually makes a lot of sense in some ways.
Well, can you, between now and the next meeting, kind of draw me pictures of who and when, in terms of their term of office? I'm talking about board office, and when their term ends, because I thought that was pretty interesting that some folks aren't scheduled to actually go and be reelected, let's say, until after their term expires. So if you could just kind of line that up for me, maybe just something narrative, if you haven't already, and just shoot it over to me so I can get a better understanding. I'd appreciate that.
It is sincere when I say I would be delighted, because I enjoy doing flowcharts and colors and different things of that sort. So, but I will also not let this take away from my day job and the other tasks that I have.
Excellent.
It won't be a trouble at all.
Thank you. Anything further on that issue? All right, hearing that takes us to item number 9, MOU Task Force update from the MOU Committee Chair, Drew Goddard, Board Member Goddard.
All right. Several things have happened since our last full board meeting. One, Chair Milner and I, the Executive Director, and other staff members met with MNPD to kick off negotiation of the MOU. That was a preliminary meeting. We talked about ground rules and process, and we did give them, just verbally, or orally rather, a list of concerns, not an exhaustive list, and there will be minor corrections and whatnot, but to give the department some idea of what our concerns were going to be going into the discussion. The department had said they had minor corrections, but the rest of it was working for them. So that's not surprising. That's what I expected. Since then, at the chair's request, I have drafted specific comments to be transmitted to the police department before our next meeting, which is next Friday, December 2nd. Had a draft out. The committee reviewed that, made suggestions. I need to plug those in. And one additional concern Executive Director Fitchard has raised in terms of getting promptly reports and updates on TBI investigations when those are delivered to the police, that we get copies of those as well. So I will have that out in the next couple of days, recognizing it's Thanksgiving, and hopefully we'll have that. What I'm shooting for is to have a full set of those comments to the department by Monday, and then we meet Friday and get serious about this. that we've been serious, then we get very specifically serious about the details.
Any questions? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Goddard. All right, hearing none. Let's go now to the Executive Director's report. Director Fisher.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to start with the personnel update. So myself and Chair Milliner interview candidates for the assistant director position, and hopefully we'll have a selection underway pretty soon. We also reposted several of the positions because the pool was very small in regards to the research analyst, the digital evidence technician, and the investigator. We had some things happening, so they're all reposted. So if you know of anyone who's interested, share. That information is not only on the Metro HR's website, it's also on our social media platforms. And I'm going to check on if I can send it out to like other employment places like maybe Monster or Indeed.com, and maybe gather, because a lot of people just may not know about Metro's HR department. They're posting on Nashville.gov. So hopefully we'll get that posted on other entities, but it does close in 10 days. So the first week of December, sometime around the 2nd maybe, for those particular vacancies. We also, like I told you in the last meeting, we hired a new social worker who's been doing some great work and trying to get us up to speed on HIPAA regulations and some other things, and forms that we're trying to create. And we also hired an additional investigator. They're both here today. We appreciate them being here. Simone Call and Angela Williams. I think she had to leave, but so we're very happy to have them on board. So we talked a little bit about the MOU committee meeting, and we're going to have a follow-up meeting on December the 2nd. We continue to do trainings. The new employees are getting up to speed on all of Metro's trainings. I did want to mention that each of you have to complete a mandatory sexual harassment and workplace violence, I think it is training. You're supposed to do that within 90 days of your appointment to the board. And so I had someone check on that. There's only a few people who are, and I'll send you an email, who haven't completed that training. It's an online training. It shouldn't take that long. I think it's maybe an hour, if that long. And so I got a list from HR. I don't know if it's the most current list, but if you haven't taken it, just send me an email and I'll make certain that you get the link to get those classes so that you can continue to be on the board without any issues from Metro. So our meeting, we've had this month, I had a lot of just regular operational type of meetings. I didn't post them all, the HR meetings, just coordinators meetings, all these types of meetings. So I didn't post all those. I'm going to go into the community outreach. We've been really busy in the last few months. Very, very thankful for our community liaison, Ms. Robinson, who continues to move our agency forward with outreach, linking me with organizations that I wouldn't normally, be linked with. I can't do it on my own. And so she's been very helpful with helping us build those community partnerships and sharing our information with them. I participated in a history interview with the Metro Public Defender's Community Liaison. They're doing like a 60-year timeline, and they wanted to include, and they wanted to be inclusive and for people of color who have worked in that agency to be recognized. And we also did a presentation to the Goodwill Industries. They had a training class, and so we were out there doing training with them. We went to a meeting via Zoom with Moms Over Murder. We also hosted a wonderful town hall meeting, which I'll get into in a few minutes. And I also attended the American Muslim Advisory Council's Empowering Women event on Saturday, which was really, really great. Our town hall meeting was co-hosted with the National Action Network, and it was last Saturday. It was at the historic Z. Alexander Luby Theater. The theme was police oversight and the power of community participation participation in the process. It was a big success, I think. I mean, we met our target of individuals that we had thought would show up. Some came in and, peeped in and stayed for a little while and left. And so it was good to see. I saw judges, council members, lots of community members and people. And so it was really great to see that many people support this. I will tell you, I was a little dismayed that MMPD said that they would be at our meeting and then pulled out at the last minute and said that they could not provide someone to be there to speak to the community about police oversight and how that's working with them and so on and so forth. But I think it was a missed opportunity for them. The panel included a subject matter expert and consultant, Carton Myers. He's out of Chicago, but he's worked with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, Department of Justice. He's done a host of things. I thought his presentation was really, really timely, and it was very informative. We had Dr. Sekou Franklin, who's a professor of political science at Middle Tennessee State University. We had Theda Murphy, a co-director of No Exceptions Prison Collective, sharing with us the voice of the community and how these criminal justice panels and talks, how they affect Black and brown people as we talk about mass incarceration and how that intersects with policing. So it was really great. And then we heard from the faith community, and Reverend Keith Caldwell was there from the Shea Hubbard United Methodist Church. Our next board meeting will be held on Monday, December the 12th. It's going to be at the Nashville Bordeaux Library at 5 o'clock. We switched times because, of course, we were getting really close to the holidays. Hopefully, we'll have those proposed resolution reports for you. So that meeting, I think, will be a little longer because I wanted to tell you this, that Trulio has contacted me and they want to be at that meeting. They said they could come. They did ask for about an hour's worth of time. I told them I wasn't sure if I can give them a whole hour because they have, I guess, a pretty extensive presentation. So we just have to determine how that schedule looks. And, of course, they would be flying here from another city. And so I did want to give them, some time because they're paying to come and present this to us. So we can just talk about that amongst ourselves and figure that out. And if not, maybe if you want, we could push them back to January. But I think the quicker we get them here to show us that technology that they have regarding body-worn cameras and analysis of body-worn camera footage would be really helpful. And so they've been working with Chief Acevedo, and he is currently, I think, in either Colorado Springs or somewhere like that as an interim chief, and apparently using that same technology. And so I'm interested in it. I think there was several board members who were interested in it. We just want to, of course, I don't want to waste their time per se. I don't think it's wasting their time, but I want to give them the opportunity to put on a really great presentation since they're coming here. So anyway, that's something that we could think about. Research is still going on. We still have the body-worn camera advisory report and use of force things that we're working on. So Gavin has been really, Crowell Williamson, working hard to get the information that he needs from the police department to be able to, continue with those reports. And if we have to have that. The police department has been delaying. It's been delayed for a lot of records. We have, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, but I've noticed, I've been keeping track of it. I've noticed since the body-worn camera issue has come up, which happened like last May, June, that we have consistently seemed to have longer wait times on our records, especially as it pertains to body-worn camera footage. And so that's concerning to me. We have outstanding records from September the 30th that we haven't received as of yet. And so I'm going to start, documenting that very concisely so that you can see it. And we can determine why this is happening. I have brought this to Chief Hagar's attention. He has tried to work with me on it. And so I'll continue to work with the police department. But in order for us to have an MOU negotiation meeting about timelines, all of this is tied into it together. We can't meet a timeline if we are waiting on records and it's been 2 months, 3 months to get the records in order to move our investigation forward. So I just wanted to leave that with you and stick a pin in that. So this month, we had a total of 4 investigative complaints. 2 of those are director-initiated complaints stemming from the 2 shootings that happened last Saturday. So I will talk a little bit about that in a moment. We also had 10 non-complaint contact calls for service, and there was 1 issue disposition related to the MMPD conduct, and we got that from Chief Drake. I sent that to you all, so if you want to discuss that, we can. Our MNCO investigators submitted 6 requests for records, reported having longer delays in receiving records from MMPD, like I just said. Not only is it just body-worn camera footage, it's also records. So I just wanted to say that because I can understand when they're talking about the body-worn camera there, they have to review it. It shouldn't take 60 days to review some, body-worn camera footage. I understand that it is a longer process, but the redactions should not be extensive. We have already agreed upon what kind of redactions should be taking place. So it shouldn't be, it's not like they're going in and having to redact a whole lot of information, in my opinion. But and what we agreed upon, there's a list of records that should be redacted and other things should not be. So I don't know what the holdup is. We talked about the MOU. There was a force review board hearing, on Thursday, November the 17th. I was in attendance at that particular hearing, and there's another one scheduled on Thursday, December the 1st, and I'll be at that hearing too. I want to talk a little bit about the shootings that occurred. So on Saturday, November the 12th of 2022, MMPD officers were involved in 2 fatal police officer shootings. One occurred in Madison on Maple Street, and another occurred on River Road in the West Nashville area of Davidson County. Investigator Vernon Johnson was on call during this time and responded to both incidents. Shooting number 1. I was notified by MNC Investigator Vernon Johnson that a police shooting had occurred in Madison at 2:45 a.m. is when he called me. Shortly after the initial call, I received a call from Commander Lara. We talked extensively that evening, that morning, gathering information, and he shared as much as he could, as much as he knew at the time. It was a pretty fluid scene. Investigator Johnson was briefed again when he arrived on the scene. And upon his arrival, he observed an unknown male laying on the ground deceased. The TBI had arrived and was processing the scene for its criminal investigation. He continued to brief me. So Investigator Johnson continued to call me and give me updates and tell me what was happening. I had lots of questions. So while he was there on the scene, he remained on the scene for a few hours until he went to MMPD headquarters to view the unredacted video footage. So that's the first shooting. The second one, I received notification from Commander Lara at approximately 6:20 p.m. that another fatal police shooting had occurred. MNCO Investigator Johnson also contacted me to give me an update. Johnson headed to the location, which was near the Davidson-Cheatham County line. I responded to the scene as well, and upon arrival was briefed by a TBI special agent in charge of the scene. I observed the scene. I was told there where the deceased was lying and what all of the materials were around the area. And of course, it was blocked off with tape, and there were cars on both sides. So cars where the officers drove up and encountered the decedent, and then cars in the other direction, I guess, for officers who arrived, afterwards. After TBI collected, I'm sorry, I skipped that line. All right. I responded to the scene as well, and upon arrival, I was briefed by TBI special agent in charge. I observed the scene, was told where the deceased was lying, which was slightly out of view from the staging location where myself and Investigator Johnson were located. After TBI collected all evidence, because I left, Investigator Johnson was walked through the scene and briefed once again. They had told us that might take a long time to collect everything, and so I just left Mr. Johnson there to do that. He's equipped to do that, and he called me to say that he had finished that, and then he was headed to MMPD headquarters to view the body-worn and in-car camera video footage of the incident. He also made an MMPD records request for all video footage related to both fatal shootings. In the past, past, they just put that information and uploaded it to a shared file drive that we have where the body-worn camera footage is housed. But we got an email saying that they needed us to make a formal request so that they could have documentation of it. And, so we did that. That wasn't too out of order. It was a little different, but we went ahead and did it. And so I was told that information is uploaded to the shared file. I will tell you this, that the parent of the victim decedent in shooting 1 in Madison has called multiple times, and all of this kind of goes back to why we need a social worker. The parent has called us in distress, left multiple messages, lots of emails, and it's obvious that that person is experiencing, a whole lot of trauma in the throes of it, and some of that is because there's not any information being shared with them. So I just wanted to put that out there as well. And so I'll take some questions at the end, but I wanted to talk a little bit about where we are with our case management system. It's just really not up to par. Like, we have a really antiquated case management system that is hard to run reports. It's called IA Pro, but it's not even the newest version of IA Pro. I don't want to invest in it because the newest version is not much different than the version that we have. It was the industry standard many, many, many years ago, but there is a better system out there that I think is better for us, which is a system that I've talked to you in the past about, which is called Civil. It is I think it has just an easier, friendlier user interface. I think it's also more accessible to people who want to file complaints on their end. It can change the language. They get a tracking number. There's all these, things and tools that I think would be very helpful. It's also cloud-based. It has the credentials from the Department of Justice, FBI, whoever, NCIC, all of those, and it is being utilized right now in about 5 or 6 cities across the nation. So it has been successful. I've heard great information about it. And just so that you know, based on what I've been told by experts in the field, is that most agencies use a cloud-based storage system, that is the industry standard, and that they use a lot of them use evidence.com. And that is also information that was included in the 21st Century Policing, the Obama report that talked about the 21st Century Policing report. So using servers that we're using now, our city is using servers to house the information and so that they can have control over it, I guess. But that is an antiquated, outdated way of housing that type of technology. Just I made that point. So we're trying to get that. We have to go through a procurement process. We've had some issues with our IT department saying that they can't necessarily build out, or they don't have the capacity to do that. So it kind of leaves us in this little I just feel like we're just sitting still because Metro IT is saying, well, we can't really do it. JIS hasn't given us a go ahead or green light to change to that platform. So we're kind of left just in this bubble, which causes us really a difficulty in the work that we're doing, because for a week, we've been trying to get our new staff onto IA Pro to be able to just put their basic case notes in when they take a call. And so we've, had Gavin work on it with Metro ITS. It's just been a challenge, and it's been now almost a week that the requests were made, and we can't get our new people signed on to this particular case management system. It's very bizarre. So that's where we are with that. We also just asked them to change our website, and I put that in there in the information so that you would know. There was at some point, I have no idea when, we had a long, complicated web address. that I had no idea why. And so it was a very simple fix, and they changed it so that community members can reach us really easily. Our website now is www.nashville.gov/COB. That's very simple for anyone to be able to find us and be able to file their complaints. They can either go to that or they can go to www.mnconashville.com. Either one would bring them up to those complaint and accommodation pages, as well as give them all the documents and all the board information as well. Next, we have an office space issue. We have outgrown our office space. We have, of course, as we hire new people, we have to become more creative in how we're going to be working in our office. I mean, there's only really 10 offices completely in that office, and so we are, pretty much at capacity right now. And so we will have to have some people working remotely, I think, and try to, figure this out. Currently, we have just a conference room that could house people for a little while. I have reached out to General Services. I had a person from General Services come to our office and try to figure out how we could even make some modular space, like maybe create some cubicles. The office just isn't conducive for that kind of space. So we are looking at sharing office space amongst individuals in the office. My only concern with this is not that people have to share office space or even have cubicles. The issue is the type of sensitive information that people are sharing with their investigators. Some don't want to talk about this with other people present. And so we have to figure out that we're being respectful, that we're offering them safe spaces to share. So those are my main concerns with that. Board membership, we talked a little bit about that already. We have one mayor's nominee rolling off, which is Dr. Hildreth, and then Sean Witzel and Mark Wynn are both community organization nominees. So if there is anyone that that's interested, you guys might want to stay on, if you do, blessings. But if not, then we have to start really working towards trying to get back up to full speed. I know the mayor's probably going to have a pick. I'm more concerned about the community organizations. It is a 3-year commitment, and I don't think that we're as needy as we used to be, but your time is really valuable, and I respect that, and we do need you on this board. I mean, we got a lot of important work to do together. So that concludes my report, I believe. Yes. If there's any questions, I'll take them.
All right. Questions from board members. I see Mr. Goddard.
Just one question, one suggestion on the front end. I'm not going to make a motion, just a suggestion for consideration. Suggestion for consideration on Trulio and an hour of meeting in December, where I hope we have some PRRs as well. My suggestion would be that for consideration, have a full hour sometime either right before or earlier in the day or whatever the board meeting for a full presentation they have to staff, and let the board members know when that is. And I may well want to go to that. Right now, if I'm available, I would, but not take a full hour of the formal board meeting for that. Have a shorter presentation for that to think about. See,
okay.
Obviously, they're not here to talk about. The other thing was, when you're talking to two things really on the discussions with Metro IT. I think we should, as a board, ask you to consider, as a staff board to consider using some of our funds, and I'll get later about reallocation of our budgeted funds, to have some independent of Metro IT, a computer IT consultant that can advise us. That Metro IT seems to be slow to get what we need from time to time. Some of that may be their workload, some of that may be figure out what we need. I know that Mr. Crowell-Williams does a great job dealing with them, but there's inefficiencies there. But some consulting group that could learn what we do and help in that process. And if Metro IT is backed up and it's something where they know the software and it involves highly confidential information, could help us with that. Mm-hmm. I don't know what dollar figure to suggest might be appropriate, but it seems to me some level of money might be efficiently spent there. related is when you were talking to Metro IT, did they have anything to say about the longstanding request that something be set up where board members, when we're considering PRRs, can see the full report, the other stuff that's relevant to that, if we want to look at that before a meeting without having to go into the office, take up staff time, our time that way? Any progress on that?
No progress on that. I think the last thing that I heard from Metro, it was with Metro Legal, wasn't it? Do you recall? It was Metro Legal. The last thing I heard was that, gosh, that was a long time ago, that Metro Legal was looking into it. They were trying to get with Metro IT to find out a better way. It's the same thing every time. So I will follow up with that because I'm curious as to what that's about as well. I don't know if it's a confidentiality issue, then we just need to sign an agreement. If that's the case, possibly, I don't know. But they didn't mention that was the issue. They didn't mention that was the issue at all.
I remain curious.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. But I appreciate you bringing that up because I need to follow up on that.
Mr. Wynn.
Thank you, Director. I wanted to ask you a quick question, and you may not be able to answer it or not, but you said the shooting in the western part of the county, River Road, is that right?
Yes.
I've had several folks contact me after the report came out and ask. I knew nothing about the case, but there was a report in the media that the person who was shot was unarmed. Is that accurate? Was there a report from our board that said he was unarmed?
Well, what I was told was that he was armed with a straight-bladed knife, is what I was told.
Did our board say he was unarmed then?
Our board never said that.
Okay. There was a media account of it that said that, I think it was Fox News, said that he was shot, an unarmed man was shot by Metro Police in River Road. And I wanted to, if it was attributed to our board, and I wanted to ask about that.
Yeah, that didn't come from us.
Okay.
No. The only thing that I want to say about both of these shootings, and I brought this up to the MOU committee, is that what I have discovered by looking at OPA investigations is that OPA is investigating these cases pretty much at the same time that the TBI is investigating these. They're doing their administrative investigation. And so I've been saying, because this is what we have been doing, even though it seems now that that things have changed. What we've been saying is that we can't conduct these investigations until TBI finishes their criminal investigation, which could take months. And what I found out, and really was, a little bit shocked that OPA was investigating by interviewing officers almost just a few days later after the TBI. And so we've always talked about parity. And I think that there has to be some type of meeting with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation if their language is that, if they have put restrictions on us, which they haven't specifically. We've kind of been doing this because this is what we were doing from the very beginning since we started, even though that's not what is happening currently. And I discovered that by, looking at their, just looking over their reports. And so that is something that I brought to the MOU committee. And so hopefully we will get that sorted out because I don't think that we should wait for months to start our process if, in fact, the process has already begun with another agency that's parity with us. So,
thank you, Director. I just wanted to mention the comments I'd gotten were about whether this man was armed or not. I know we're going to eventually, I guess, look at this case maybe, but the sensitivity is pretty high. Officer Thompson was stabbed to death here in 1915. And in 76, Curtis Jordan was stabbed to death. So both of these people obviously were armed when they killed these two officers. So I just wanted to mention that. And if it wasn't attributed to us, then that's good. Thank you.
Yeah, I have no idea about that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Director Fitchard, how does the TBI notify us once they've completed their investigation or keep us apprised of the status? I have yet to be debriefed about, I don't know if because it hasn't one occurred, debriefed about the results of a TBI investigation. How do we make sure that we are a part of that process and that this board is aware of the results of those investigations?
Yeah, we haven't been notified by TBI at all. And so because we don't have an agreement in place with TBI. So what was happening just on so we have a agreement with the district attorney's office. And so what the district attorney has said, and I think that's where we got this kind of workflow process that doesn't necessarily move us forward. It may move OPA's investigation forward, but not ours. And so we get a notification from the district attorney that will say whether or not the case has been closed. If, in fact, the case is pending and they want to prosecute the officer or find some allegations of criminal activity, we don't know that either. It's just we do have a liaison, or we had a liaison with the district attorney, but I haven't talked to that person in a very long time, and we haven't been getting those notifications. We do get one that's mailed to me that would say, that the district attorney, they found no calls or whatever that. I do receive those letters regularly for each particular one. But as for any investigative information, I have not received that.
The issue of the issue regarding the technology, I had something on that. I hear Board Member Gardner when he talks about that hour for Trulio. I might suggest that we do maybe an online demo, maybe a Zoom demo if they want an entire hour, or that we appoint a subcommittee to actually offline, separate from a board meeting, have that kind of demonstration from Trulio. I definitely want to see the technology and to understand what they're offering, but I don't think that it's a great use of our time to have a 1 hour presentation. So however you might pare that down or otherwise streamline that, and talking with them would be greatly appreciated. The body-worn camera, going back to the shooting that we saw, that your investigator saw when he went down to MNPD, is there anything in place to make sure that your investigators get a chance to see it before it's released to the public?
They do. So when the shooting occurs, they go to headquarters to look at it prior to, we kind of work that agreement out prior to it being released to the public. So they do show us the entire, as much as we want to see, without any redaction. So it's the actual, but as quickly as it's loaded up to whatever their server and they're able to download it from WatchGuard, then we get to see it pretty much immediately after the shooting process. Okay, sometimes good. TBI is in the room, sometimes they're not.
Good, because it came out pretty quickly to the public, the first shooting did. And one thing I'm definitely a stickler for is that this board not be the last people to know. And it's the same thing with the TBI investigation results. I can hear about them on the news, findings, no findings, and that kind of thing, but that's not how this works. Okay, right. So I don't want to, assume, processes that may not be in place. Okay, but I certainly do not appreciate or would not appreciate not being amongst the first to know before the public knows, and we start getting phone calls from people. Okay,
right. So I agree with you.
I want us to do what we can to focus on that. That's about all that I have. I will say that As far as the office space is concerned, my personal experience has not been a good one there. As a member of the board, and as I can imagine, as a member of the citizens of Metro Nashville, Davidson County, I'm not going to pay $25 to park. Come talk to you. Okay. I don't know where 3M is. I can wander around for quite some time. Yep. Of course, the configuration is not such, where privacy, is assured. So I want to continue to encourage you and staff to do whatever it is that you can to bring some accountability to this process and some urgency to this process where we can get to a place where the people of this county are comfortable and welcomed and not burdened. Right. Because right now the best way to get to you is by public transportation, to be honest with you, okay? And a lot of folks may or may not do that. So I think that means a heck of a lot. Hopefully there are locations in Midtown and there's locations somewhere in the Metro Center, somewhere, anywhere, okay, where it's not an overly congested and where it lacks that sense of secure privacy, and confidentiality that folks need in order to come forward. So I just want to go on record and say that. And that's what I had as far as your report is concerned. Any other board members? I see Board Member McCray.
Thank you for recognizing me, Chair. I hope you can hear me. My voice is going in and out this week. Can you hear me now? All right. I just wanted to echo and just kind of uplift the fact that since the last board meeting, there were 2 fatal police incidents. And like yourself, Mr. Nguyen, several community members reached out to me in concern. Yeah, that's just sad. Like, excluding all of the facts of the case, or 2 people lost their lives between our last board meeting and this one. And so as we continue to uplift concerns of community members, as we continue to investigate cases of misconduct here on this board, I hope and pray that we continue to center the humanity of folks who come across, not only whose cases come across our desk, but it is my charge and my plea to the officers of the city who have taken an oath to protect and serve, to center the humanity of folks who you may encounter in crisis, who you may encounter in distress, who truly may need your help in certain situations. And so I just wanted to uplift and echo that. Thank you, Chair.
Dare I cross the line here, but I appreciate that. And I have some of those very same sentiments. We know that everyone is out there, has been traumatized. Everyone involved has been traumatized. I'm so glad that we do have some wraparound services now in our office. It doesn't take sympathy. It doesn't take there's no bias associated with providing services to an individual, regardless of which side of the trauma that they're associated with. And I'm glad that we have the resources to do that. But there is a process. There is an investigation that is being conducted by the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. And that is, again, why I'm being so methodical about accountability with the TBI and when will we know what, so that we don't sit here and make assumptions, right, okay, without having conducted our own investigation, which cannot necessarily, reap fruit until after we've heard from TBI. So I not only want to be notified when they reach the end, I want to be notified of their progress. I want to be notified of their progress. And I appreciate you opening that door for me there a little bit, and I appreciate everything that you have to say, because there are human beings involved here, and it deserves a certain amount of attention and passion. Board Member Goddard.
I was going to say very briefly, the TBI and district attorney process has to do with regard to whether the officers involved committed a criminal act or there's reasonable cause to believe. Our Our job is not that. Our job is whether they have violated policy and should be subject to sanctions for that. So our staff, I think what the executive director is telling us, and I concur, can prioritize and decide to investigate some of those in parallel. And getting witness and police officer interviews early in the process is much better if it's an important case that we need to prioritize than 6 months or 8 months or a year later doing that. So I think the executive director are on the same page. That's my understanding of what you're describing as a door that's been open to us. Is that?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Let's pursue it.
Okay.
Let's pursue it. Let's launch our concurrent investigation. And, of course, being consistent with whatever rules may apply in terms of precedent and who goes first and all that. But definitely, it sounds like we can begin our own administrative investigation into that process so that we can operate from more of a position of information, at least internally, based upon what our staff finds. Okay? And I appreciate that, as well as being kept informed, and maybe this, again, goes back to the MOU issue, not only of the results, okay, but of the current status of what is going on with these investigations, okay? Because people shouldn't be made to wait, okay? All right. Anything further on the executive director's report? And I noticed that you did include that the 4 complaints, 2 of which are citizen-based, that have been added since our last meeting. Director Pitcher?
I'm sorry?
There's 2 additional complaints that have been filed by citizens since our last meeting, and 2 that have been initiated by you. And certainly, you know, we are, you know, here to deal with that primarily. And, you know, we don't have any PRRs on the agenda tonight.
Well, actually 3, because we received that 3rd one, and you all received it as well. So we have 3. I didn't include that one yet.
Right. Right. But we're intent, you know, to continue to press on that issue as our priority for the people. And I think that our meeting being moved up in December, okay, consciously is going to be helpful for that. But we definitely need to, you know, have some PRRs in front of us for that meeting. Do you anticipate a number of PRRs that we should anticipate?
Yeah, Mr. Yoon and I discussed, there was one particular case that it was an extensive amount of body-worn camera that he needed to go back and review. How many hours was it? Like 18 hours? Yeah, it was a lot of body-worn camera footage. So, and there were some things that, so I'm anticipating we'll have at least 3. Okay. Yeah, for sure.
I see.
Yeah, no, think about 3. Yeah, about 3, yeah. Yeah, because initially we had 5, but one of them, I mean, there's some, as he dug into the evidence or the exhibits, it was like, okay, wait a minute, we need to spend more time reviewing this stuff. And so that was the issue with that one. But I do think, just for clarification, we have 5 complaints this month, and then we'll hopefully have 3, I think we'll have 3 PRRs ready for sure in December.
We'll look forward to that. All right, Board Member Spencer.
Thank you. Director Fisher, I have 2 questions. The first one is around the case management system. So you said that you're currently going through procurement process in terms of trying to update the system. Can you give an estimate of how much that would cost to update it?
Yeah, so it's the initial the initial build out of this particular system, because that's what it would be. It'd be a build out. I think that was running around 24,000, anywhere from 18 to 24,000, depending on how much information. They can build it any way you want. I think one of the things that is really helpful to us is that because you have multiple departments using it now, we can kind of we can be a little more creative and use some of the things that they already have in place that might be working for them that we won't have to pay for because they've already been created. So I was happy about that. But it'll be between 18,000 and 24,000. And then yearly, it's annual. I think the annual cost is anywhere between 6,000 and 8,000 to maintain it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And since I'm looking at the organizational structure and also thinking about resources, and especially thinking about, as I believe Dr. Hildreth put it a couple of meetings ago, widening the lanes. And I know we're still hiring some folks, but when were we thinking of having a new proposed budget for next fiscal year proposed? Because I'm thinking about perhaps getting a little bit ahead of the game, especially being ahead of the game, but still trying to be in an appropriate time frame.
Yeah, so I'm glad that you raised that because they're starting those budget talks on, I think I'm scheduled December the 5th, maybe, to have the initial budget talk. So I haven't really got all my information together yet, but I'm working on it based on what we asked for last year, what we didn't get. And so those budget talks will pretty much, they will help you frame what it is, and really kind of get a jump on the things that you need. I still need an executive assistant. We still will have an administrative service manager position that I want to get advertised and hired in if we can before the end of the year. I think we still will need a legal person in our office, a legal assistant, to work with the legal advisor and to get to be able to produce these PRs. I mean, the more complaints we get, we are seeing an upward trajectory in the complaint process, and that's because we are out in the public sharing this information with people. I don't want to have investigators, especially if we start talking about really strict timelines on how to get this stuff done. I think that we will definitely have to increase our legal staff to be able to meet the demand. Like, we can't do it. I mean, if you take 5 investigators and they turn in 5 cases a month, or let's just say 3, that's 18 to 20 cases for one legal advisor to go through that evidence and get that work done. So it's important that we continue to include those who could help with this, push this process forward, because right now we are staffed with 5 investigators, or we will be, and we still only have 1 at this point legal advisor to review that evidence. So mostly it will be some staffing, but we also have to consider like where we're gonna put people.
Yeah.
I think that and then how we're and we're going to talk, I guess, about, Drew had some questions about the budget, so I guess we'll have that more robust conversation in a few minutes about it, because I've been thinking about it, but I haven't really wrote it on paper. I haven't prepared for that meeting. It's December the 5th, but I'll be prepared for it, and I'll share that information. Any of you are welcome to come to that meeting with me if you want, so you can figure out which one wants to be a representative. Welcome to. I'd be happy to have you with me at that meeting.
Can you say what day and time that is again?
Yeah, it's December the 5th at 9 a.m., I believe.
Okay.
I can send that information to you and confirm
please do.
And Director Pitcher, just to add, once you select an assistant director, okay, that assistant director will also, or may also, be able to assist with the production of PRRs?
Yes, I hope so.
Okay. Anything further? Okay. All right, let's move along then. MNPD tracking update, Gavin Crowell Williamson, research analyst. I'd asked to understand a little bit more about what seems to be a recurring issue of non-responsiveness or perceived non-responsiveness on the part of MNPD detectives, and wanted to kind of know more about cause and effect, whether it's a question of resources, a question of caseload, a question of whatever. And so if you would share with us what you found.
Good evening, Board. And yeah, I know I'm only on here for that, but I have a few other things that I hope you'll indulge me in when I'm done, because this update's kind of brief. On November the 8th, I reached out to Commander Lara and asked him to provide us with the information that was requested by the chair. Specifically, I requested the total number of detectives employed by MNPD, broken down by unit, the total number of cases assigned to detectives by unit, and then by unit, including the number of active, suspended cases, the average length of case from open to close over the prior year, the clearance rate, and the number referred to the DA for prosecution. As I said, I requested that on November the 8th, and we heard back just this afternoon from Commander Lara that due to the complexity of the request, they would not have any further information for us by tonight's meeting. So I don't know if Commander Lara has any further information, but that's all I have on that.
evening. Yeah, unfortunately, just due to the amount of information and the different people that we would have to talk to gather all this information, it was just not going to be, and then we have vacations, we have the holidays, so there's a lot of different things that were kind of in play. Some of the people that would give us this information were not in the office, but I think the understanding that we're talking about you're talking about a whole department with many divisions, many units, people moving from one division to another, from one unit to another, the different case loads. Then we're asking about, you're requesting information about cases that have to go to the DA's office. That's somebody else that we have to go and talk to. So it's just very complex. It's not a very simple, just kind of go in and get the information. We have to really work with a lot of different people to get this information and get it accurately. So we respectfully request, if you give us time for the next board meeting, that we should have all this information, to you. But again, just in the time frame that we had, with the complexity of getting information, was going to be very difficult to have it all accurately to you tonight. So
I appreciate that. So the December 12th board meeting, which is moved up from its regular time, we should have some kind of data by that time?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And I will get with Mr. Crowell-Williamson and make sure he's been keeping in touch with me to making sure that I get that information to you. So as soon as I get it, I have no doubt that I'll get with Mr. Crowell-Williamson and make sure you get it. He gets it to you.
I appreciate that. Please continue.
Thank you.
You may want to stick around.
Not on my behalf, because that's all I have on that particular update. Though I do have a few more topics that I wanted to discuss. Sure. I'll call you if I need you. You don't need to stay up here unless you'd prefer. So the next update, I told you at the last board meeting regarding effectively the recommendation tracking that I've been working on with Commanders Loring and Gilder. Commander Gilder reached out on last Thursday evening and provided us with the updated SOPs from both OPA and from the background and recruitment unit. I was at a conference, so I didn't have time to review that until this morning when I got back, and I did have a few questions for Commander Gilder, but when I reached out to him, I learned that he was out of office today, so I sent those requests to him. They're rather not substantial at this point. They're not anything that's causing me great concern, but they are things that I want to get addressed before I give the all clear that I've gotten all the information I need. I can go through each of them if you'd like, but of the 9 recommendations that I was seeking more data on, 6 of the 9 passed the test. The other 3 I had questions on, and they may or may not be easily answerable. We'll find out when Commander Gilder responds, but that's the update on that.
What are those 3?
The information I'm looking for, or the requests, or excuse me, the recommendations.
The 3 that are outstanding recommendations. I'm sorry. Let's not belay it. I'll get with you offline about that, okay, unless you have that information readily available. You mentioned that there were 3 outstanding. 6 of the 9 were answered, but the other 3 were not.
Correct.
Is that something you can synopsize for us right now, which 3 were not?
Sure. I mean, broadly, the first recommendation was a variety of processes that the recruitment team was taking to discuss their social media review process. That was to be codified. They got an opinion from Metro Legal that they were going to codify in their SOP, and I was seeking further clarification on that because the language that I was provided with did not necessarily mesh with what was in the SOP, so I just wanted to get more information on that. The other requests, Commander Gilder just said that they would upload an evaluation report that they completed to a particular location on their website that I could not find. As we all know, some Metro websites are a bit difficult to navigate, so that just might be pilot error on my part, so I asked for clarification on that. And also, he mentioned that the background and recruitment unit is consistently evaluating the reasons for no-shows to their civil service testing. And he mentioned in his initial response that that was a process they were already doing and that would be codified in the SOP. And there was just some vagueness in the language that I wanted him to update me on.
Thank you.
Yes. Next, you also requested at the last board meeting sort of a demographic breakdown of folks who were failing out of the law block. So Commander Lara provided us with that information for the last 3 graduating classes. I synthesized it today, and I can send it all to you after this board meeting. Would you like me to hit just a high-level overview?
How is it different from that which I've received? Is it different from the data that I received that shows the numbers by gender and by race?
If I was not aware you received that information, but if you have, then no, it's not different than that.
Okay. Well, go ahead and give us a general overview because I do have some concerns about it.
Sure. So of session 95, there was an initial class of 55 that went down to 42 who graduated, which means 13 failed out or resigned for various reasons. Of those 13, there were 6 who failed out of law block, 3 white men, 1 white woman, 1 black man, and 1 female of other race. Session 96 was a lateral class, so it was a bit smaller. There were 24 folks. Of those 24, 19 graduated, meaning 5 failed out or resigned. And of those 5, only 1 failed out of law block, which was a white woman. And session 97, there were 43 original folks, of whom 28 graduated, meaning 15 failed out or resigned. And of those 15, 3 failed out of law block, a white male, a black male, and a male of other race. The research part of my brain has a ton of reticence to crunch numbers that are this small. It's just not, you're not going to be able to say with confidence that there's a pattern or a trend here from, 6 people failing out, 1 person failing out, 3 people failing out. So whatever we do here, I would encourage you to move forward with caution. But I do think, particularly when it comes to session 95, there are some flags that are raised that we should be thinking about. But as of right now, I'm not prepared to have any sort of formal interpretation, but those are the numbers.
Commander Laura?
Thank you. And yeah, the information, unfortunately, what was sent to you was sessions 97, 98, and 99. Mr. Carl-Williamson then requested again sessions 95 and 96, which were the sections that actually had some concerns about. And I resent him the information there, and I'm sure he'll get that information to you. But just to make a couple points on those, of the session 95, initially, I think we believed it was 7 people that failed out. It was actually 6. But it's important to note, out of those 6 failures, we had 3 male whites. But one of those male whites re-entered the academy and graduated session 97. So they failed out. They got rehired on to a different session and went to session 97. The male black who failed out, he also re-entered the academy and then graduated from session 97. And then the female Hispanic, she failed out initially. Then she was rehired and went to the academy in session 97 and graduated. So 3 of those that actually failed out initially in session 95 were rehired, and then they went to session 97 where they did pass law and they graduated and they're out in field training right now. And then also for the session 96, that was a lateral class. So there was 1 female white who actually failed out and did not return. So I think that's important to understand that, yes, there were some that failed out, but they did come back. They did get the assistance that they needed, and they did pass the academy, and they are now on the streets doing their field training.
What stood out to me, and it was quite unexpected or offline from what I was really asking for, is the number of white males who applied for the academy and are accepted into the academy compared to the number of women and people of color. All right, and that's not on anyone but us. And one of the things that I saw was that we have classes of 20, 30, and 40 people, and we've got 2 to 4 African-American men applying for these jobs. Okay? In terms of women, and I don't have the number in front of me, but it's not substantially higher across the board. And that is something that out of the data, it just jumped out at me. And you have the numbers in front of you. I don't need you to crunch them for me, but it's a preponderance of underrepresentation in the academy, particularly on the part of black and brown people and women. And I am here to make a plea and to say that we have to be a part of the solution. I'm talking about the community and the residents of this city and this county have to be a part of this solution. It's not the conversation that is going to win the day by saying, oh, look at what they're doing to us if we're not a part of their organization, a part of us, and a part of this police department. So I encourage our young people and middle-aged people, because I understand that limits for age have been raised, limits for physical capability have been lowered or modified in order to accommodate a greater breadth, if you will, of the community. And I am just reaching out to our young men and women who are eligible and people of color to take a hard look at the MMPD and be the change. Be the change. So that stood out for me, and I appreciate you guys, tracking down that information. It was very illuminating. Thank you. Yes, Board Member Witzel.
I just have a quick question for Commander Laura. So when someone fails law, is there a special process for, like, you talked about how 3 or 4 of them came back and were able to pass and are now, in field training. So is there like a special process for someone who's already been through it to kind of help them through what they failed, or is it a complete restart?
So, yes, that's a great question. So if they fail out because of law, they failed out of that session class. And then we look at it on a case-by-case basis. But if everything else looks good and it was something that we believe that they can remedy, they will be allowed to go back into a different session. One of the things that we've done and we've had in the past, and we started up again, is we have now a part-time employee who is a former Metro Sergeant, and he's an attorney. And what he does is he actually assists with law, and he will meet with all of those who are having issues with law. And we also have some of the law instructors that do the same thing on their own time many times, is if somebody's having issues with one of the law blocks, they will meet with them or a group of them and go, hey, let's go over this before the exam so that you have some if you have questions, we have somebody to help answer some of those. So again, if somebody fails out, they have the opportunity to come back. It's on a case-by-case basis, just depending what it is, what the issues are, but many times they'll have that opportunity. Do you want to come back and go back through this academy? Or they may say, no, we don't want to go back. I want to, leave the department. Or somebody say, yeah, I want to give it another shot. And if everything looks good on the department's end to allow them to, they'll come back. They'll go through law again, do the same exact training. And again, we do have those resources there that will help them with the issues they're having understanding the law. And that's actually something that's we've had for a while, but many don't take advantage of it for different reasons. Sometimes they just don't have time because they have families and they don't have time to do that extra, studying or getting with the law instructors. But the resources are there, and now the director of law for us, Ms. Catherine Morante, she's actually put in place that we have a specific person that can help them, who is an attorney and who is a former Metro Sergeant here, who knows the law and who understands what he's trying to teach, to assist these recruits so that they better have a better chance of passing the law portion of the training. So hopefully that answers a little bit of your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
Commander Laura, do you know what the number I'd like to know the number by race and by gender of folks who apply for the academy but who are not accepted into the academy, and for what reason? Is that data readily available in a generic sense? Because of those low numbers that I talked about earlier, they're very important, and I meant what I said, but at the same time, there's also the possibility of looking at why there is such a preponderance of one group over the other, and it may be who gets in and who gets out, or who doesn't get in. And I'd like to know a little bit more. I'd like to, Gavin, I'd like to know more about that as well. Okay, so just for those classes as well. Can you say something about that?
So I don't have those specific numbers because I can't say who actually, there's a big background process. So there's different parts of this process where they may pass this part, but not the next part. And then they get kicked out of the process of being hired because of, maybe have their background or the psychological exam or something. So I can't really tell you that off the top of my head, but I can go ahead and inquire and figure out. I'm assuming you're asking how many people applied and then how many people were accepted to the academy.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
Now, for example,
demographic.
with Session 97, how many total were there?
For Session 97, it started off with 43.
How many of those were black males?
For Session 97, it started off with 3 male blacks.
How many male Hispanics?
Male, so it doesn't say, I don't have male Hispanic, but it says male other. So that could be Hispanic, Asian, others, but there was 8.
8?
That were male other.
How many women?
There were 5 female whites and 3 female blacks.
Okay. How many?
And 3 female other, so
Okay. That leaves how many white males?
21 white males.
Okay. And I saw that as being kind of typical, if you will, over the 3 sessions that I saw. In fact, those sounds like better numbers than maybe a couple other sessions. So when we look at the per capita fallout, then it's a different story. So yeah, I would like to know more about the numbers as they come in, and who gets and the eligibility, and who gets certified to continue and who doesn't.
So one of the things, sir, is again, and you're looking at it, 43 total and 21 were male whites. You've got more than half were minorities in this class. Same thing. Well, on the next class we had 25 male whites out of a 45-person class. Where we had about 20 minorities, so a little less than half. So we're really working on expanding that and getting more minorities in there. But it's, again, recruiting is difficult at times, and so we are diversifying the academy more and more. And again, we're getting more females now than I think we've had in a very long time. So
Appreciate that. Thank you.
yes, sir.
All right, on to the next. I don't have too much to say on this next point. I believe the director already succinctly captured it, but I wish that I had more of a body cam research update to give you, but we have been spinning our gears on this for a couple months now, and most recently, a few weeks ago, there's going to be, I believe the conversation is being moved above my head, and so Director Fitch is going to get with the director of MNPDIT to have a further conversation about getting the data that we need for this. I imagine we'll have another update on that before the next board meeting, but that's all I have for now on that. And then just a process thing, since we spoke earlier today about a potential policy advisory report, just so everyone is kind of clear and on the same page, the very fastest thing that could happen with this is that we would internally develop a policy advisory request that would then have to be approved by the director before we could bring a research proposal and project plan to the board, which could happen at the next board meeting in theory, which I believe is 3 weeks from today. So that is the fastest that this next step can go. The board will then have to approve that research proposal and project plan before research can be conducted, given our rules. So,
are we talking specifically about the sexual harassment policy?
yes.
That sounds like a track that we want to be on right there.
I'll do my very best.
Is that Director Fitcher? Is that something we can do?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we can start that, but we got to think about the timelines because we still have 2 other reports that it just depends. I guess we would have to prioritize. Like, I do think that because the use of force report is a really large report with lots of data. So was the body-worn camera. I don't know. I mean, I think it's something that we can do. I just don't want you to be overwhelmed. So you have to think, like, I know taking on, and it's very hard for him to say no. Or can we hold up and wait until January? And so don't overwhelm yourself. I think, so we can talk about it a little more before I say it's a green light, because we do have he has a lot of requests out to MNPD. And we just, need to get that information and get it where it needs to go, and then get 2 people hired so that there's some assistance, right? And get them with the holidays. I just think that it may be a challenge to say, yes, let's get started. And then in 3 weeks from now, then we're out for, so January might be the best time to do that.
All right, Attorney Ian.
If I could just show you demonstrably, this is the section on policy advisory reports. And for those viewers at home, it goes for about 2 pages in length. If you'll let me read 5 lines of it. To assure the best use of resources before undertaking such a matter, policy advisory reports, the MNCO shall prepare a research proposal and project plan, which will include an overview of the proposal, primary research questions, a brief background of the topic, research methods, data required, a list of relevant stakeholders, an implementation timeline, an impact and risk assessment, and advice on whether the expedited board reconsideration of the intended draft public policy advisory will be necessary. But again, that's 5 lines out of, I think, 100, and I won't say anything more.
But I think what he's saying is that
It sounds like what he's saying is January is more. It's going to be more like it. So we'll look forward. I did have several things that I specifically asked Commander Laura to address. Number one was of the body-worn camera redactions that we saw, there were 3 in MMPD's analysis where there was muted language. All right, 2 of them were explained to us. There was a 3rd outlier, and you have some more data on that. You have a response to that 3rd outlier.
Yes, sir. And I'm assuming, did you all by chance receive the email that I forwarded to everyone with the information on your questions? I just want to make sure that everybody has that. I tried sending it to the emails that I had on file, and then it also had a zip file attached to it with some extra information.
No, but I saw it.
Okay. So what information I have on here is what I'm going to give you, because that's what I was given. So that 3rd video footage that was muted it had to do with a juvenile that was on the phone while attempting to contact his grandmother. And during the conversation, he called the person he was speaking with on the other line the N-word. And that was what was muted. That's what I was told, that there was nothing else. No language by the officer involved was muted in any way. It was just that specific N-word when the child said that was muted off that 3rd video, and that's what was found during that audit.
Thank you. We also ask you to let us know about any trauma-informed training that is currently available to officers.
Yes, sir. And so, again, if you, during that email that I sent, on that zip file, I actually have all the lesson plans. I'm hoping you're able to open that up. It shows, but we have several different trainings that the Training Academy provides for all of the officers and officer trainees. We go from early response to mental illness. It covers that, this as it relates to information gathering, establishing rapport and actions to avoid ineffective communication. We have verbal defense and influence, which covers understanding how to build cooperation and collaboration and improve community relations. We have death notifications, which covers the process of delivering a compassionate notification, ability to be sensitive to family members and the reactions, importance of positive ID and aftermath of dealing with notifications. And we also have basic investigations, which covers some degree as well. Victims of crime is very detailed and the most detailed and trauma-informed interviewing techniques. It covers how to engage verbally specific types of victims of crimes, identifying victims of crimes, normal trauma response, learn how to engage specific types of crime victims, learn how to respond to and what to be aware of, understand the importance of cultural responsiveness, and understanding how first responders can incorporate a victim-centered approach to meet the needs of traumatized individuals. And again, all of those lesson plans that have a little bit more detailed information on those trainings is in that email that I forwarded to you.
We had concerns about how individuals were being interviewed in a manner in which there was a perception of lack of privacy, lack of confidentiality, and lack of respect. We asked for you to inform us as to what, if any, policy is in place in MMPD that addresses that issue.
Yes, sir. And so we don't have a specific policy due to what we were speaking about was an informal conversation with somebody. For formal interviews, formal or official interviews with members of the public, those are conducted according to policies and procedures, which is if I have a witness coming in for a specific case and we want to go and interview with them, we want to make sure that they understand their rights and that they have protections. They don't have to speak to us. They don't have to cooperate with us. And we want to make sure that if we take them into a room in the back, interview room, that they understand, they may feel initially anxiety and feel that they are obligated to speak to the police. But we do go through the process of making sure that they know you can leave at any time. You don't have to talk to us. The door's right there. We leave the door open. We take all those steps to make sure that they understand that they have rights and that they do not have to cooperate or speak to us. If it is somebody who's in custody, then we also give them a Miranda rights. So there's different things that we do to let them know what their protections are. If it's an informal conversation where somebody comes in and just wants to speak to us regarding a situation, we're expected to use first empathy, make sure that we understand, hey, this person's gone through a very difficult situation. They're coming in to talk to us, and use some common sense. You're not going to speak about something that is very sensitive in a place where there's a lot of group of people that could hear this, and it's just not a good way of talking to people. So I think it's an empathetic, common sense approach to discussing how, when, and where to discuss sensitive matters with the public. There's times where we can't take them to a back room and to a location that's more secluded, and then there's times where that's not possible, but we try to find a way to speak to them in a way that they feel comfortable and they understand that we are sensitive to the issues and the trauma that they've had to deal with, and that's our way of dealing with this. But again, we don't have a specific policy on how to conduct informal conversations, if that makes sense.
Well, but based upon what we've heard in public comments and other meetings, particularly in our October meeting, it seems as though there's some failure there on the part of certain MMPD personnel to use that common sense approach, particularly when dealing with a victim who has already been traumatized. So we'll be looking into that further and seeing what we can do to add more accountability and sensitivity and humanity to that process.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, Board Member Nguyen.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commander Laura. I got the email, and I opened up the lesson plans that you sent and read through them. And there's some great courses in here. But what I'm looking at is recruit training. Does that sound right? These are recruit?
Yes, sir.
So, the old saying, training's perishable, which means, in-service takes up the slack. My question would be, when I think about trauma-informed victim-centered training, I think about the neurobiology of trauma, I think about collecting psychological evidence, and a lot of other things. Courses that I've seen anywhere from 8 to 40 hours of trauma-informed for all personnel, like what Gainesville, Florida police are doing now. They're across the board for a whole department. So it'd be correct to say that a trauma-informed victim-centered approach to interviewing victims who are traumatized is not in the in-service schedule for the police department?
And I apologize. Yes, sir. So it's actually, verbal defense and influence was actually given to the whole department. It wasn't just the trainees. We actually started with the whole department, and then we incorporated into our training for our trainees. But we do have different trainings through in-service and roll call trainings that we periodically put out, depending what the command staff, executive staff decides, and we put it out there so we can refresh their memories on how to do some of these things. And in-service trainings, we actually do have a lot of these that we re-give to the officers, so just they can have something to refresh their minds and memories on some of the ways that they need to do things. So it's both. It's both.
So one last thing, and I'm sorry to bother you with this.
Not at all.
You may not know it. So if I'm sitting in the academy class and in service, an instructor comes in the top of the day and says, for the next 8 hours, we're going to talk about toxic immobility. We're going to talk about neurobiology of trauma. We're going to talk about all the traumatized, all the things that we need to know as officers, whether you're specialized as a detective or a traffic officer, on how to deal with a traumatized citizen. Does that happen? Is there a block of course just for trauma and not de-escalation, which is important, and all the other topics as well, but is that happening at the academy and in service?
Not that I know of that there's any specific that just touches on trauma that I know of at this time, but I can go back and reach out and make sure maybe I'm missing something from the training academy, but nothing that I know of that's specific just to trauma that's being taught.
Thank you, Commander. I appreciate it very much.
Yes, sir.
Anything further? Any other questions? Director, Board Member Spencer.
Thank you again. And from what you've been saying, it definitely more so kind of feels to me, this is more such a general comment, not necessarily a question, but it does feel that there seems to be grounding for some kind of policy around having even these informal conversations. Just from what it seems from our October meeting, that there was a kind of breakdown in what one person knows and what another person knows. And so I do thank you for coming over here and talking to us and informing us, and also for the email that you sent out. But from my perspective, I really also am agreeing on the point that it's something that I feel like we should perhaps pursue, and that there should be some kind of like further guideline. Because I understand, having empathy, using your common sense. But there's also points and times, and a lot of times we do say, common sense ain't always common. And so having a kind of guideline, some kind of policy that sort of sets that out so that we avoid what happened back in October. And then I think, and perhaps kind of going off with what Member Wynn is talking about, I would love to hear a lot more about the kind of, about more of the research that MNPD officers review as a part of the learning. So, for example, if there's we're talking about the neurobiology of trauma, but then thinking about. And then also coming from my own experience, having sat and heard and listened to officers talk around this, for example, just, there's saying, an officer saying perhaps that there's research on all these different kinds of things, but then also advocating that, back in the days, you used to, for example, just talking about disciplining a child, you used to just physically beat and abuse your child, and saying, kind of suggesting that was the more proper kind of stance to take. And kind of disregarding the research around ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. And so for me, I've sat in spaces where I've seen and heard an officer say this, well respected, and that's probably his own personal opinion. But it does kind of feel like that there's kind of a disconnect from my experience of talking around what the neurobiology of this is and saying that there's so much research and data that we are receiving and we're looking through and that we're studying, and then having that kind of, I guess perhaps to say, purview around, even kind of disregarding that, in my understanding, disregarding the kind of that kind of corporal punishment, that kind of trauma that it does to a child, and then also having sat through and I understand it probably wasn't used in a derogatory way to any other people, but hearing an officer say sissy, and thinking about the forms of training and kind of bias training that police officers are also taking into account and are having to go through. And it feels like from several different instances that I've seen the kind of disconnect between where the training is, what it's supposed to be, and then how people are actually using it and talking about it in their day-to-day lives. For example, an example of the officer talking about, that's what they used to do back in the old days. You used to physically discipline your children. You used to hit kids. He could have read all these different things and that still be his own personal views, which is his own thing. But then also for him as an officer, while wearing the badge, to talk about that, it feels like there's a disconnect. And I think for me, I kind of have an open kind of comment, open kind of question for us as a board and as a body. What does that mean for us when it comes to us talking around trainings, and when it comes to us laying out these kinds of guidelines which is within our jurisdiction of these kind of recommendations? So, are there other systems in place that we can also build in to really get a sense of that this training stuck? that this education stuck and that this is being worked out in this kind of way, in this XYZ kind of way. Does that kind of make sense for people?
And as we see these cases come before us, like we have in the past, we're definitely now, I am more informed just being on this board about what a real science that is. You know, what a real process and the methodology that is. And I think it's our job to continue to take MMPD to tasks when we see these types of complaints where there's the type of discourtesy, particularly to victims, and this type of lack of humanity when it comes to victims, and that's where we are. That's the job we're here to do, and also in terms of reinforcing what are just I'm beginning to understand to be some national kind of standards in the field. Again, hopefully, in answering to Board Member Wynn's question about specifically what we are doing with in-service trauma-related types of training, we'll be able to go a little bit more in depth with things with you as you come back, and continue to be that watchdog and looking for those instances where we can reinforce the need for it to become a little bit more ingrained in more of an integral part of the process.
If I could, sir, I think that one of the big and very important parts of, I know the board, they are part of the Community Police Academy. I think it's so important and crucial that each one of you all is able to be able to join and to be a part of that, because a lot of these questions can actually be answered more in depth in that training. You have a class where they talk about the training academy, so you'll have some of those that are actually in charge of putting these trainings together, where you can actually ask them very specifically. You're asking me questions, I'm giving you answers that I received, but you may be able to ask them questions where they can get really in depth in the answers. And I'm giving you a lot less than what I wish I could, but I know that they can give you a whole lot more. Same thing with the law. We have the director of our law instruction who's there. And when you talk about, issues with law and why people are failing out, you can get answers directly from those who are actually teaching the law and actually dealing with that portion of the training. So again, it's so important to go to the Community Police Academy, because you will have those people there that can actually give you a much better and thorough answer for a lot of these questions that you have than I can give you. So I just encourage y'all for the future, if you haven't had a chance to do it, definitely it's an opportunity to really learn more about the department.
If I may, I don't necessarily want to kind of put the onus on certain people, but a part of where my examples are coming from are from when I was a part of the CPA. And I think that's the thing for me, because it's, for one thing, it's later Tuesday night. I know everybody's tired. And for me, also thinking about myself and different identities that I hold. First one, having a common sissy, and what that means around for me as a trans person, for me as a queer person, also understanding that he's not necessarily trying to use, a person's not trying to use it in a derogatory sense towards me, but just in general, and kind of forgetting that the weight of the word it has, because it's still used as a derogatory term. And so for me, kind of sitting through and having to experience it, I'm basically experiencing kind of a microaggression, and I'm trying to figure out what to do at that kind of point. Well, I know I'm tired. Do I kind of make a fuss right now? Do I have to, or do I kind of sit, grin, and bear it? And I have to kind of make those kinds of decisions. And ultimately what I think I'm trying to say is that some of these experiences that I name, again, have happened during the CPA. And that for me, it feels like that there's something just deeper that needs to be addressed, that I think really requires some very heavy, difficult, and hard-hitting work, I think, on our part, perhaps, in terms of being able to kind of address those kind of situations. Because for me, as a community member, I'm not this X, Y, and Z kind of person all day. Sometimes I'm just another person that just wants to go to the grocery store. And so for me, being in that kind of space where, I'm confronted with, this basic microaggression, but then also knowing that there's supposed to be trainings and supposed to be fail-safes around that. I kind of don't know where to take that. And it kind of shows this kind of this hole that I don't know how to fill. And I think I would ask more of my peers, my colleagues, what other tools can we also suggest and bring forth to fill that hole? If that makes sense.
Ma'am.
But again, thank you for your comments.
Mr. Witzel.
I was curious, this talk about the academy, and it's just a question popped in my head. And it's for you, but maybe Director Fisher can chime in too. Is there, I know they have the mobile diversity day with the academy, because I participate in that with the nonprofit that I work with. So they have the different departments come in and they do a talk or whatever. And it's just, I guess, I know one of them is teaching them how to interact with different immigrant groups, et cetera, whatever. Is there time set aside for MNCO, COB at those diversity days? Have you ever done that?
Yeah, we were previously with the Metro Human Relations Commission, had been invited to participate in that, and then they had some leadership change, and that we haven't had that discussion again. But we would definitely love to do that. We are going to the academy, but we're very specific in what we're addressing, the kind of curriculum that we're sharing when we go to the recruit training classes to tell them about what we do as at the CPA. What I will say, if I can, is that I hear what Member Spencer is saying about microaggressions and the things that she experienced while in the CPA, right? By the instructors using loosely language that was offensive to her and possibly to others, and not feeling empowered enough to approach it and address it at the end of the meeting, or whether it was appropriate to do it or not. What I will say is, the CPA, just so that everyone understands, the CPA is giving us an overview of the police department, right, for every department. It's not training us. It's not showing us how officers are trained in specific categories or issues in this work that we do. Not that it's not important, but I do think that some more extensive training is what we need as well, too. But overall, I think that if we're talking about trauma-informed and that is her experience, then what we're saying is that there's a missing link somewhere, whether it is in the instructors, maybe there should be some type of survey afterwards to determine whether or not what they were sharing was, information that you wanted or how you felt about it. I think that there is some opportunity, to get feedback from people who are required to attend, opposed to people who are just, decide they want to attend that. So I hope that made sense and really supported what you were saying, because it does concern me from what she reported to me.
Member Wynn.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I wanted to add just one other thing, and I agree with Member Spencer and her concerns. Trauma-informed police departments around the country are, and this really falls into our kind of ballpark here, examining historical trauma and community trauma. And cultural humility, not just being culturally competent or culturally sensitive, but culturally humble, basically, to different diverse and underserved populations. And that takes a lot of careful, long sessions with officers talking about what historically has happened in communities of color, or gay and lesbian couples, or any group. Gender bias falls into that as well. So whatever the recommendations we make as a board to the police department, there's a lot of information out there that's being used and produced by the Justice Department and a lot of other states that are really addressing some of these issues they're connected. It's very connected to other things that we see when we have a problem with an officer, if we have one, that could be connected to their not understanding historically the negative and positive impacts of police response. And we're having those conversations now. This is not an outside group. This is the police families now having these discussions, and it should translate into training of the young officers and training of the older officers as well, so they can examine their own selves and look at their own implicit bias if they've got any. Explicit, we don't want it. That's grandfather's bias, but implicit is something that you have to be told sometimes that you're exhibiting, as you well know. But that's got to be talked about in a classroom in an adult way with an instructor that's talking about all the traumas that we face, police face today. So I wanted to mention that as well.
Yes.
And thank you all. Director Fisher, what you were talking about does kind of fit in line. That there's this, it feels like there's more some kind of missing link. And I do believe that I think we're kind of moving towards finding that link. And again, I also wanted to say that I didn't necessarily want to put the onus on just individual people, but to kind of more so bring my examples forth. But as part of a way of looking at this as a systematic kind of issue, not kind of individualizing, but systematically. And that even for me, I do have different trauma around different words and different slurs that have been thrown at me before. And so, but at the same time, I'm also very economical with my energy and my time. And so if it's at around if it's at 8:30 on Tuesday night, I don't have as much energy as opposed to 1 p.m. 1 p.m. right after lunch. That's a whole different ballgame. It's a whole different Maxine. But regardless of where my energy is in that moment, I think as I was talking about earlier with perhaps some guidelines around these informal conversations, that there should be more guidelines in place, that there should be more checks in place, so that when these kinds of issues arise, we have better ways of responding, and not just responding to them, but also being able to be proactive in creating a system that gives us the conclusion that we want to see. And I think I really appreciate the conversation that's been had here tonight.
Cultural issues are the toughest. Okay, they're the toughest, and we have to just continue to work at it and deal with it every time it comes up, and do the best we can, to address it. We're at the point now. Thank you, Commander Lord. We're at the point now of new business, and I believe Member Goddard, new business.
And I have some new business.
All right, I appreciate the hour, and I appreciate your time. I do have something I think is important to take a few minutes on. I'll try to be efficient with my talk. I want to say a couple of things preliminarily. It has to do with PRRs and trying to prioritize them. But let me say first, I firmly believe the executive director and her staff are working very, very hard. I think they're smart. I think they're good. I think they've got far more that we are asking them to do than they can possibly do well. And some things from day to day get prioritized and don't. I think this has been, I think because of that, and some of the things I'll get into, that we are not doing as well as we need to on PRRs, but it is not a personal or general criticism of anyone. Second, you've heard me talk about, those who've been here a while, talk about how it's one of our main things and the charter requires this and that. My concern is not simply rule-bound. I do respect the rules. That do bother me. Member McCree's comment on humanity struck me earlier. What I'm going to say doesn't rise to the level of life and death humanity, but when individuals that have been, or at least believe they have been mistreated by police, come to our group, come to our staff, and bring the trauma and everything else with those questions, and run the risk of what is going to happen to me if the police department hears this and doesn't like it, whatever, whether those fears are founded or are unfounded, they are real to some of those people. And I do not believe that the timing we've had so far, and my comments are what we do going forward. I'm not here to criticize. Where we are now with this, I don't believe adequately respects the humanity of those individuals. It provides them with the respect I would like our group to be able to. And for me, it's a matter of justice. If someone come in and we are part of the process to deal with an allegation of police misconduct, I think we need to be able to process those much more promptly than we have. Now, I realize I'm ignorant on a lot of how this is processed in the department, and I don't ever like being ignorant, but I really hate it in public. So I called Jill, and she was kind enough to give me some time to discuss where things are, what the things are in place, so on and so forth. And I learned several things that I think will be helpful in this. One is when I first came on the board, we had a deputy director that was spending a chunk of his time dealing with the investigation. My sense is Jill will know better than I. Executive Director know better than I. Not so much hands-on as being a big part of the management of that group. And we've been without a deputy director or assistant director, whatever the official title is, since January. So I'm happy to hear hiring that position a priority. Something needs to happen fast, I believe, is there, as well as filling out the rest of the investigative staff. Right now, I'm told the whole staff combined is able to complete about one investigation a month, and part of that I'm hopeful can be addressed with an executive director, can be addressed with a second legal advisor I'll get to in a minute, but part of it needs to be, I think, that group working together and figuring out the most economic process system and set a process to work forward. I'm deferring to the executive director on how that's best done, but I'm suggesting that's part of it. The other thing I learned that I found very interesting is that the budget document that the executive director sent around today highlights this. For last budget year and for the budget year before, there was just over $500,000 of our budget that was not spent. And when that happens, that money goes away as far as workers. We get a new budget, we're not short on money going forward, but that's money that's not spent. A chunk of that is when we have new fill positions and we're not able to fill them immediately. They've been budgeted for 12 months. If it takes us 3 months or 6 months to hire them, that's some money that's not spent. And I would like, and this may just be one thing for the board generally agrees, we take a motion, I don't know. I would like to encourage the executive director to work with the chair or bring things back to the board, whatever, where we see during the course of the year that we're not going to spend all the money, look to see if there are other positions or other things we need that we could go to Metro on and say, we're not asking for a dime more, we just want to reallocate some stuff. And if that's a simple process, we've got it. If it's not, I think we need to weigh in politically on that. If we've been given a budget, we should be able to make full use of it as opposed to having each of the last 2 years $500,000 less able to be done with our staff and the other things they need. IT needs other thing else than has happened. Specifically, and I've got a lawyer bias, you guys know that by now. Specifically, right now we're on budget to probably have a similar kind of number. And one critical need I've heard that didn't get budgeted, and I firmly agree with, is a second legal advisor. And I would strongly recommend, and this, what I'm thinking about is whether we need a specific motion to empower the executive director to request that. Requesting of Metro that we be allowed now to go hire a second legal advisor and fund what will be 6 months of that salary from the budget. We're going to have plenty of money in the budget. What I see right now going forward. Executive director is nodding yes. I discussed it with her earlier. And I think all of that together, I am hopeful could fairly soon have a regular process going forward of several PRRs a month being considered, whether it's 3 at a full meeting or we do a special meeting, hopefully got a full meeting of other stuff. I'm easy on all that, whatever works. And I'm very encouraged to hear where we are on moving forward. As I understand it right now on the deputy director hire and planning on having 3, maybe 4, but at least 3 PRRs 3 weeks from now. All that I think is positive. Thank you for your time listening to all that. It was a little rambling, but it did all kind of come together. Do you think we need a motion to encourage the executive director to request a legal advisor position and otherwise look for reallocation of budgets that it would be most helpful for her over the course of the year?
I've had conversations with the executive director about reallocating existing resources. maybe not for a legal advisor, but for a legal assistant. And I know that the executive director...
Legal person, I should have said, whatever the second position is.
And the executive director has been in direct contact with folks in HR and also in Metro Legal's office in regards to that. I think she hears us on the priority and getting that done sooner rather than later. But which doesn't really need a recommendation from us because he's already been authorized to do that. I guess we could continue to encourage that that's something that, bring us back a status of, definitely, on December 12th, and let us know where we are with that. And we encourage you to, I know you have to work through the HR processes like everyone else, but if you could, sooner rather than later, please.
It's not it's not only HR. I think most of it, and I've met with my finance team, they basically discourage you from moving line items around and things of that nature. They also talked about there was some civil service connection to it and going back and, if you're going to create positions that, and you're taking the monies from line items that you would have to go and get, I guess, the finance director to approve those things. It's frowned upon. Not saying that they were discouraging me, just kind of giving me how it works. I'm fine with doing it because I explained to them that we needed to do it anyway. Regardless of that, the finance director, if we're saying that this is what we need in order for for us to have the ability to process complaints and move through a process where people are, their cases are not just lingering and languishing around, then I think that there shouldn't be a big problem with the finance director approving on moving these funds to be able to do that. But that was kind of the conversation that they had with me on my finance team. I sent that information to John Bunton. He's no longer with Metro Mayor's office, and he connected me with, I believe her name was King, which she was the manager, but the people that I work with pretty closely during the budget our team or the people who are assigned to us, we had that conversation. And it's not really an HR issue. It's a, Department of Finance, issue more so than HR.
Okay, so you cannot move salary savings around, or is it like?
Yeah, well, we don't have a whole lot of savings in salaries, and so what we would be doing is taking some funds from, you got this form here, you would be taking it out of these different categories to make up to create that salary.
All right, Member Goddard?
Two things. One, on the salaries, we've got 4 months saving on a director's salary that hadn't been spent right now. We've got 4 months saving on whatever other positions we've got. That's got to be enough to fund 6 months of a legal advisor. So I would suggest, unless I'm missing the math, we do have enough just within salaries to go, I keep saying legal advisor, whatever the legal person you want is. Second, I've spent most of my legal career we don't usually do that as not the end of the conversation. With permitting other things in my law practice. If the answer is, if we're meeting resistance because that's not how it's typically done, I would suggest and I'm looking at the chair, and if it's helpful for the mayoral appointees to weigh in, to address that with the mayor's office early and see if we can't get some support for having the flexibility we need here. Don't want to step on anybody's toes, but to the extent we can be helpful, let us know.
We need help.
I guess is the other way to say it.
I think from this conversation, what really highlights to me is just the importance of the council fulfilling the budget that we initially request. Because even for us to do this, which I do agree with, and I'm very pleased that the director is already doing the work around it. But then I'm also thinking about for someone to take the job, that technically your job is up in question in a couple months. So if you have 6 months, you start, and then hopefully if things go the right way, then you're reapproved to continue to having your job and to have that kind of stability. And so I think, it is a good maneuver. Again, full agreement, but I do think it really highlights just how important budget budget season is and how important it is for those in power to go ahead and approve what we are initially requesting in the first place. And I think if any council members, any folks from the mayor are currently watching, I think that definitely needs to be a line item. That is what we request definitely needs to be in people's heads, especially considering what we all agree to from Member McCree's comments, just looking at the humanity of folks that are coming into this space, the cases that we read, the people, the names, all the actions that take place in those cases, they involve real human beings, real people. And in order for us to fully do our work, we have to be properly funded and properly staffed. And so, again, I'm probably just being a dead horse here, but we shouldn't have to do this kind of maneuver. We should already have that kind of resource and we should already have that kind of access. And that's something that we should just have from the jump. But I really do appreciate this.
I think overall the desire of the board is clear. We have funding for positions. We're going to get them filled ASAP. And we're also very much so still concerned about the bottleneck, if you will, that is hopefully going to be somewhat relieved by the appointment of an assistant director. With that, I want to make sure that your concerns were addressed. Is there any other new business?
Yes.
Director Fisher.
We were notified that there was going to be a public hearing on license plate readers, and that at the very last minute, the administration wanted to have a public meeting right in between doing this holiday session. And I think that has many in the community concerned that there's not enough time to be able to have a real thoughtful conversation, within the next few weeks because of the holiday season. But the police department wants to move forward with their pilot program. So I just wanted to say that one of the things that we as a board and agency should be really thinking about is the policies surrounding the policies that they create, the MMPD created regarding the license plate readers. We haven't had any conversation about that. They haven't showed us any type of policy drafts. And so I think that the concerns that we raised many months ago for almost a year regarding license plate readers in this city and how they would be implemented, how they would be, where they would be in this city, how they would be used. And I think it's especially important now because, when the legislation was created, that resolution, it incorporated this, the MNCO as an auditor of those license plate readers. And so without a draft policy, I think that, instead of getting involved in, we know that they're going to be deployed, right? We know that. But what we don't know is how they are going to be deployed, what our role will be, how they will be shared with us, the information that we need. We're hiring a digital evidence technician to help with that process in auditing them. But how will we go about getting that information? What does the policy says for their deployment? We have no knowledge of anything. So we are working blindly through this process, not getting the information. And I'm assuming that they've created some type of form of draft policy, but who vetted it? Who read it? Who made any determinations, or did they have a public hearing about it? Or anything of that nature. So I did want to address that because this hearing is happening, which I think the hearing is too soon to happen without a lot of public input. People are not going to be interested in doing that in the holiday season. It could wait to January, but maybe, I don't know why they're pushing it so quickly. But I do want to raise the concern that if you're gonna have a pilot program, we would like to be able to see the policies related to it.
Member Spencer?
Thank you. And thank you, Director, for bringing that up. I think, being very real, it's Thanksgiving is coming up, and then we're going to have Christmas. There's no time. Like, people are not going to be able to think about this. People are not going to be able to have time for this. Some people are probably saving up to make sure that they can go spend time with their loved ones. It makes no sense to do it right in between the holidays. It would make so much more sense to do it after sometime in the new year. And so for me, this perhaps would be out of our jurisdiction for a resolution, but I think it would be beneficial perhaps maybe if there was some statement strongly urging that they do push the public hearing back to make it more accessible for community members after the holiday season.
After looking at the email and reading the documentation, that's certainly where I am at this point. I know that there is a hearing that I think is scheduled to come up in early December. What was the date of that?
Well, they haven't really made a formal date,
but the Metro Council hasn't conducted their final vote on it, have they? As far as launching the pilot?
Oh, as far as launching the pilot, no, but, the resolution has already been approved that they can do that. Yeah, but they haven't, from my understanding, that they had planned for inclusion in the 12-6 council agenda, which will be released on 11/30, and that would constitute a formal notice.
And a public hearing?
I don't think the date has been set as of yet specifically, but it's supposed to be within the next council, I guess, during that time is what the administration.
Well, at the very least, let us send notification to Metro Council that we would like to see more time and for a public hearing, and also to get more information.
Oh, okay. So what I've been told, yes, I had the 6, but I got that. Okay, so it says that they are counting it as a public hearing, which is Tuesday, December the 6th at 6:30 p.m. And so they are saying that is the date.
Yeah, we want to push that public hearing. And in the meantime, we should also let a Metro Council or have them acknowledge our role in at least being a part of that policy development, and maybe encourage them to come back and do a little bit more of have a little bit more of open discussion with us.
So would you like to write a letter from the board, from the chair, how do you propose we do
Absolutely, yes, from the board.
Okay.
And let's see if we can push this so that we can have a full hearing on it when it's convenient for everyone, in the community. And also, I don't want to forget this part, we would like to have a little bit more one-on-one about what the codified policy is that they're going forward with. Let Commander Lord get to something.
You have anything to say about that?
Sir, so I don't have any information on the policy yet, but I will go reach out and see what we have available, and I will get back to Director and Mr. Crowell-Williamson with whatever update I have regarding where the policy is at this time.
Excellent. And if there's an opportunity for us to share discussions about that between now and the hearing date, feel free to discuss that with staff as well. Okay, thank you. But the letter goes forward. Anything further? Hearing none, is there a motion to adjourn? So moved. All right, the other class. Sorry for our people, but
it's really late.
I know, right?
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.